Hi subscribers and welcome back to the channel. Today we have Nathaniel Jacobs joining us all the way from Hull in the UK. Nathaniel, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you, Dominic. Well underway with my routines this year. Just hitting 2025 hard with my fitness goals. So yeah, I'm feeling good at the moment.
Very good, very good. So Nathaniel, the reason I've asked you to join today is I would like you to be running through your £1.7 million SIPP-to-QROPS transfer, which was possibly one of the last ever QROPS transfers done from the UK. So Nathaniel, to start off with, give us a quick summary of the client situation and when they first reached out to you.
Yeah, so he is a director of a care home company. He was an ex-investment banker as well, and he reached out to us. It was maybe the start of October, and he mentioned that he'd been trying to get his some of his assets offshore as he was aware of the autumn budget coming up, and he was concerned that the new Labour government coming in could potentially throw a spanner in the works and make things a little bit more difficult in the future for him in terms of his estate planning. He was he anticipated pretty well, as it turned out. That's exactly what happened. So his initial inquiry was effectively saying, "Is it possible to try and have a look at some options of trying to move some of my assets offshore?"
Okay, understood. And obviously a minute ago, I said 1.7 million. That wasn't the final transfer amount though, Nathaniel, was it? Could you please explain what the final transfer amount was from SIPP to QROP and why so?
Yes, so overall he has in his pension assets amounted to about 2.2 million. And what we'd established was that as he hasn't accessed any of his money yet, he still had the full overseas transfer allowance left, which meant that he was able to transfer 1.073 million out from his SIP and into the QROPS.
Yeah, understood. So obviously he did the transfer out, or he signed the transfer out forms with you for the QROPS. Has that transfer gone through yet, or it's still pending?
No, so it still hasn't gone through yet. This is, people often assume that it's quite a quick thing to do with a pension transfer to move it from one pension provider to another. But let's say that process started in October. Here we are towards the end of January now, and the seeding scheme is still going through the due diligence process. So you can see that's almost 3 months now that we're at. And we're still not even at the point where the transfer has been completed yet.
Yeah, and just for anybody watching this, if you're familiar, following the autumn budget, UK pension transfers to QROPS, typically a Maltese QROP in this instance, a Gibraltar-based QROPS, is actually no longer possible. You would have to be a resident in Malta to be able to now utilise a Maltese QROPS for a transfer. So this transfer, which is still live now, is quite possibly one of the final ever UK pension transfers from a SIPP to a QROPS. Nathaniel, if you were to give a summary of your advice journey and process with the client, what were kind of like the key points that the client decided to move ahead with yourself and Cameron James? What were some of the concerns he had, if any?
Yeah, so one of the key points for the client was inheritance tax. He really didn't want to be slammed with inheritance tax. He's worked his full life, he's worked hard to be able to acquire the assets that he has. And then he felt that he'd played a certain game all the way through, and then for the goalposts to be moved last minute was unfair. And so the mitigation of inheritance tax was a large decision maker for the client. So yeah, that was a huge thing for him. But it was the professionality that he'd seen from Cameron James that was the thing that really got him over the line with us. He saw how quickly we worked. He appreciated the fact that as I mentioned, we had this call towards the start of October, and maybe even mid October. And he wanted us to be able to get this over the line before the autumn budget. So effectively, we had roughly 10 working days to be able to, to get this report to him, be able to get the paperwork all completed and sent out. And he'd seen that, we have a full-time support team here at Cameron James, working full-time to be able to make sure that this transfer was able to happen. And I think he was really impressed by that.
Yeah, and also there's another anomaly with this case and individual. They had a very large portfolio allocation to a very famous stock right now. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, he did amazingly well with his stock selection. So he found a famous stock. He put roughly £70,000 in it and managed to turn that into 1.5 million over the course of about 5 years.
Yeah, and you're probably thinking Tesla get team. No, it's actually Nvidia was the stock that the client was invested in. And Nathaniel, how was that as an advice journey with a client who, let's be honest, it's the few and far between clients who do something like that and, it turns into millions. The majority of other retail clients typically may lose money on such transactions. How was your advice journey with an individual like this where, they'd put such concentrated risk into one stock and obviously it had rewarded and paid them well? How was the advice journey in saying, okay, we're now going to be using a globally diversified portfolio, et cetera, et cetera? How did that advice process go with him?
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, somebody who's had the experience of doing so well on the stock, they're quite confident in the decision making, and that it can lead to a sense of um, wanting to stick with their strategy because they've had so much success off the back of it. However, what we had a look at together was what are his actual goals. His main goal was to be able to pass on as much as he could. Obviously, have a comfortable retirement, but he's got a business already, which is going to provide that for him in his retirement. So the main goal with these assets was to pass on as much as he could to his children. So that's when we had a look at that outcome and that goal, and we said, okay, well, you've got a substantial amount of capital that you are investing in individual stocks at the moment. Why don't we take some of the winnings off the table, put it into, and it's not off the table because we're still leaving it in, in tracker funds, which are tracking the global equity markets. So he's still got an amount in quite an aggressive portfolio, but it just diversifies his risk away from one single stock where the performance and the performance can change, substantially, and the volatility can increase, decrease. But when we move it into a diversified fund, he's reducing his volatility, he's taking risk away from just having it in a single company, and that effectively could provide his children with a far better inheritance sum.
Yeah, understood. It's a funny one that, it is the few and far instances where clients are able to massively outperform the market and have, gigantic returns by investing in a single stock. So I think this was a really interesting advice process that you went through, and obviously actually followed Nathaniel closely in this case. And yeah, I was really impressed in the way that communicating with an individual who's had such a great track record of an individual stock, getting them to go to a diversified portfolio is not an easy thing. So Nathaniel, how would you say the mechanics of this transaction worked in the lead up to the budget? And I believe in this case that you were pushing to try to get everything done by the budget, but then actually things changed slightly and there wasn't so much pressure to get it done in time, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So we tried to get it done before the budget, just in case any changes came in overnight, which they did, but they gave us 24 hours from the time that the budget was actually announced to the end of the window to make any applications into a QROPS. However, we'd already sent the application forms before the autumn budget, so we was fine. And now we have up until in the middle of 2025 to be able to get the transfer completed. So we have more time now than we initially thought.
Yeah, and this is something which is really important if you're watching this video. When it comes to things such as QROPS transfers, okay, if you have a UK SIPP or a UK pension pot, you can no longer use a Maltese QROPS if you're planning to go to France or whatever it might be. But in these situations, a lot of clients don't take the initial advice which is provided. They take weeks and months and years to get back to things. And we had so many clients at Cameron James come after the autumn budget saying, oh, now I want to do my QROPS transfer. And we're like, it's too late. The legislation went live and it was as effective basically from midnight or midnight the following day, depending upon which way you read the terminology of the legislation. So sometimes it is a case of by not doing something, you are taking action with your money. Taking no action is is a decision. So Nathaniel, for anybody watching this thinking, oh damn, I missed the golden bullet. I didn't do a QROPS transfer before the autumn budget. What would be your advice to someone like, for example, this gentleman, I know he's planning or thinking of moving to Cyprus. What would be your advice to somebody in a similar situation with, say, a £1.7 million pension pot in the UK now? What advice would change for them now following the autumn budget? And, what would you advise them to do?
I'd advise them to get in touch and go through an advice process with ourselves, because it is completely down to your circumstance at the end of the day. It depends where you're deciding that you want to retire. It depends on the assets that you currently have. Depends on what level of risk you'd like to take. So yeah, what I'd say is get in touch. We can look at the solutions together. There's still plenty of solutions out there. So although this is off the table now, don't worry, there are other solutions that are available. Not all doors have been closed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very good advice that I think a lot of clients like to do the homework and their research, and we see that here at Cameron James. And Nathaniel, you'll attest to that. Sometimes you speak to people and say, oh, I've been following you guys for 6 months or 3 months or 12 months. I've watched loads of videos. That's all fantastic and great. But I think at some point, clients need to make a decision. They need to get in touch with somebody. Doesn't mean to say that you've whittled it down to the one advisor you're going to work with. Just talk to the advisor, go on Zoom with them, meet them in person, whatever it is in terms of their advice journey. Understand how the back office team works. For example, here at Cameron James, in this instance, the client was very impressed with our back office support and how quickly we got things done, but he got to witness so much of that level of support before he signed any paperwork to say he wanted to complete a transfer with us. So like Nathaniel says, I think it's really important to get in contact with a company you're planning to work with. In those first 3 to 6 months before you actually complete a pension transfer, you should have a very clear understanding of the type of professionalism that firm may be able to offer. So Nathaniel, what advice would you give to clients looking to complete pension transfers? If they're a UK resident or planning to retire in Europe, what would your general advice be to them, and things to look out for example, when researching or trying to engage with a financial advisor?
I'd say, firstly, don't panic. It seems like there's been a lot of change, and there's been a historic amount of change in pension legislation over the last couple of months, but don't panic. A lot of the changes aren't being implemented until 2027. So it gives you some time to think, and effectively, similar to what you said, Dom, do your research. Go around a couple of different firms and see who you get on with. Make sure that you look at doing your research into the actual advisor, making sure that they're qualified. Look online. It may be from Google reviews, but do a bit of a deeper search. Maybe you can have a look on Facebook groups to see if there's any sort of reviews of the firms themselves or the specific advisor. Have a look on LinkedIn. Do your due diligence and make sure that you're putting your money in safe hands. And yeah, that would be my main sort of advice towards them.
Nice. Well, Nathaniel, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We may well bring you back onto the channel once this pension transfer is finally completed, so you can give an outro session and conclusion. But yeah, thank you for joining them this morning, Nathaniel.
No problem.
And as always, subscribers, take care with UK pension assets.